Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow, and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and a custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I'm always here to guide and care for travelers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Welcome, my friend. Come in, sit down, relax. How has your week been? What have you been up to? Yes, I've been quite busy myself. I have been taking the time to rest, though admittedly not as much as I should. I'll do that right now, in fact. Let me get your usual and something for myself, and we can take a rest together. Today, we continue reading the series of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. This tale was written by Lovecraft for Harry Houdini in February of 1924. It was first published in the May to July issue of Weird Tales in 1924. Let's find out what happens under the pyramids. Mystery attracts mystery. Ever since the wide appearance of my name as a performer of unexplained feats, I have encountered strange narratives and events which my calling has led people to link with my interests and activities. Some of these have been trivial and irrelevant, some of them deeply dramatic and absorbing, some productive of weird and perilous experiences, and some involving me in extensive scientific and historical research. Many of these matters I have told and shall continue to tell freely, but there is one of which I speak with great reluctance, and which I am now relating only after a session of grilling persuasion from the publishers of this magazine, who have heard vague rumors of it from other members of my family. The hitherto guarded subject pertains to my non-professional visit to Egypt 14 years ago, and has been avoided by me for several reasons. One thing, I am adverse to exploiting certain unmistakable facts, and conditions obviously unknown to the myriad of tourists who throng about the pyramids and apparently secreted with much diligence by the authorities at Cairo, who cannot be wholly ignorant of them. For another thing, I dislike to recount an incident in which my own fantastic imagination must have played so great a part. What I thought I saw, certainly did not take place, but is rather to be viewed as a result of my then recent readings into Egyptology, and of the speculations at this theme which my environment naturally prompted. These imaginative stimuli, magnified by the excitement of an actual event terrible enough in itself, undoubtedly gave rise to the accumulating horror of the grotesque night so long past. In January 1910, I had finished a professional engagement in England and signed a contract for a tour of the Australian theatres. A liberal time being allowed for the trip, I determined to make the most of it in the sort of travel which chiefly interests me. So, accompanied by my wife, I drifted pleasantly down the continent and embarked at Marseilles on the P&O steamer Moala for Port Said. From that point, I proposed to visit the principal historical localities of Lower Egypt before leaving finally for Australia. The voyage was an agreeable one, and enlivened by many of the amusing incidents which befall a magical performer apart from his work. I had intended, for the sake of quiet travel, to keep my name a secret, but was goaded into betraying myself by a fellow magician whose anxiety to astound the passengers with ordinary tricks tempted me so to duplicate and exceed his feats in a manner quite destructive of my incognito. I mentioned this because its ultimate effect, an effect I should have foreseen before unmasking to a shipload of tourists about to scatter through the Nile Valley, what it did was to herald my identity wherever I subsequently went, and deprive my wife and me of all the placid inconspicuousness we had sought. Travelling to seek curiosities, I was often forced to stand inspection as a sort of curiosity myself. We had come to Egypt in search of the picturesque and the mystically impressive, but found little enough when the ship edged up to Port Said and discharged its passengers in small boats. Low dunes of sand, bobbing buoys in the shallow water, and a drearily European small town with nothing of interest save the De Lesseps statue, made us anxious to get on something more worth our while. After some discussion, we decided to proceed at once to Cairo and the pyramids, later going to Alexandria for the Australian boat, and for whatever Greco-Roman sites that ancient metropolis might be present. The railway journey was tolerable enough and consumed only 4 hours and a half. We saw much of the Suez Canal, whose route we followed as far as Ismailia, and later had a taste of old Egypt in our glimpse of the restored freshwater canal of the Middle Empire. Then, at last, we saw Cairo glimmering through the dusk, a twinkling constellation which became a blaze as we halted at the great Caia Centrale. But once more disappointment awaited us, for all we beheld was European, save the costumes and the crowds. A prosaic subway led to a square teeming with carriages, taxicabs, trolley cars, and gorgeous with electric lights shining on tall buildings, whilst the very theatre where I was vainly requested to play, and which I later attended as a spectator, had recently been renamed the American Cosmograph. We stopped at Shepherd's Hotel, reached in a taxicab that sped along broad, smartly built-up streets, and amidst the perfect service of its restaurant, elevators, and generally Anglo-American luxuries, the mysterious East and the immemorial past seemed very far away. The next day, however, precipitated us delightfully into the heart of the Arabian Nights atmosphere, and in the winding ways and exotic skyline of Cairo, the Baghdad and Harun al-Rashid seemed to live again. Guided by our Badaka, we had struck east past the Uzbekia Gardens along Muskai in a quest for the native quarter, and were soon in the hands of a clamorous cicerone, who, notwithstanding later developments, was assuredly a master at his trade. Not until afterwards did I see that I should have applied at the hotel for a licensed guide. This man, a shaven, peculiar, hollow-voiced, and relatively cleanly fellow, who looked like a pharaoh and called himself Abdul Rais el Drosman, appeared to have much power over others of his kind, though subsequently the police professed not to know him, and to suggest that Rice is merely a name for any person in authority, while Drosman is obviously no more than a clumsy modification of the word for a leader of tourists parties, Driogman. Abdul led us amongst such wonders that we had before only read or dreamed of. Old Cairo in itself is a storybook and a dream, labyrinths of narrow alleyways, redolent of aromatic secrets, arabesque balconies, and aureoles nearly meeting above the cobbled streets, maelstroms of oriental traffic with strange cries, cracking whips, rattling carts, jingling money, and braying donkeys, a kaleidoscope of polychrome robes, veils, turbans, and tabooshes, water carriers and dervishes, dogs and cats, soothsayers and barbers. And all over the whining of blind beggars crouched in alcoves, and the sonorous chanting of muezzuns from minarets gleamed delicately against the sky of deep, unchanging blue. The roofed, quieter bazaars were hardly any less alluring. Spice and perfume, incense, beads, rugs, silks, brass, and old Mohammed Sulman squats cross-legged amidst his gummy bottles, while chattering youth pulverized mustard in the hollowed-out capital of an ancient classic column, a Roman Corinthian, perhaps from a neighboring Heliopolis, where Augustus stationed one of his 3 Egyptian legions. Antiquity beginnings to mingle with exoticism. And then the mosques and the museums, we saw them all, and tried not to let our Arabian revel succumb to the darker charm of Pharaonic Egypt, which the museum's priceless treasures offered. That was to be our climax. For the present we concentrated on the medieval Sagenic glories of Capheus, whose magnificent tomb mosques form a glittering fairy necropolis in the edge of the Arabian desert. At length, Abdul took us along the Sharad Muhammad Ali to the ancient mosque of Sultan Hassan and the tower-flanked Bab el-Azab, beyond which climbs the steep-walled pass to the mighty citadel that Saladin himself built with the stories of forgotten pyramids. It was sunset when we scaled that cliff, circled the modern mosque of Muhammad Ali, and looked down from the dazzling parapet over mystic Cairo, all golden with its cavern domes and ethereal minarets and its flaming gardens. Far over the city towered the great Roman dome of the new museum, and beyond it, across the cryptic yellow Nile, was the mother of aeons and dynasties, lurked the menacing sands of the Libyan desert, undulant and iridescent and evil with old arcana. The red sun sank low, bringing the relentless chill of the Egyptian dusk, and as it stood poised on the world's rim, that ancient god Heliopus re-harakaita the horizon sun, we saw silhouetted against a vermel holocaust the black outlines of the pyramid of Giza. The Paleogean tombs, there were hoary with 1,000 years when Tutankhamun mounted his golden throne in the distant Thebes. Then we knew that we were done with Sikri and Cairo, and that we must taste the deeper mysteries of primal Egypt, the black Kahem of Ra and Aman and Isis and Osiris. The next morning we visited the pyramids, riding out in a Victoria across the Great Nile Bridge with its bronze lions, the island of Garissa with its massive labaka trees, and the smaller English bridge to the western shore. Down the shore road we drove between great rows of labakas and past the vast zoological gardens to the suburb of Giza, where a new bridge to Cairo proper has since been built. Then, turning inland along the Sharai el-Haram, we crossed a region of glassy canals and shabby native villages till before us loomed the objects of our quest, cleaving the mists of dawn and forming inverted replicas in the roadside pools. 40 centuries, as Napoleon has told his campaigners there, indeed looked down upon us. The road now rose abruptly till we finally reached our place of transfer between the trolley station and the Mena House Hotel. Abdul Rais, who capably purchased our pyramid tickets, seemed to have an understanding with the crowding and yelling and offensive bourgeois who inhabited the squalid mud village some distance away, and pestilentiously assailed us like every traveller, for he kept them very decently at bay and secured an excellent pair of camels for us, himself mounting a donkey and assigning the leadership of our animals to a group of men and boys more expensive than useful. The area to be traversed was so small that the camels were hardly needed, but we did not regret adding to our experience this troublesome form of desert navigation. The pyramids stand on a high rock plateau, this group forming next to the northernmost of the series of regal and aristocratic cemeteries built in the neighborhood of the extinct capital Memphis, which lay on the same side of the Nile, somewhat south of Giza, and which flourished between 3400 and 2000 BC. The greatest pyramid, which lies nearest the modern road, was built by King Shopus or Khufu at about 2800 BC and stands more than 450 feet in perpendicular height. A line southwest from this are successively the second pyramid, built a generation later by King Kepharan, though slightly smaller, looking even larger because it was set on higher ground, and the radically third, smaller pyramid of King Musanius, built about 2700 BC, near the edge of the plateau, and due east of the second pyramid, with a face probably altered from to a form of colossal portrait of Khephren, its royal restorer, stands the monstrous Sphinx, mute, sardonic, and wise beyond mankind and memory. Minor pyramids and the traces of ruined minor pyramids are found in several places, and the whole plateau is pitted with the tombs of dignitaries of less than royal rank. These latter were originally marked by mastabas, or stone bench-like structures, about the deep burial shafts as found in other Memphian cemeteries and exemplified by Panerb's tomb in the Metropolitan Museum of New York. At Giza, however, all such visible things have been swept away by time and pillage, and only the rock-hewn shafts, either sand-filled or cleared out by archaeologists, remain to attest their former existence. Connected with each tomb was a chapel in which priests and relatives offered food and prayer to the hovering Ka, vital principle of the deceased. The small tombs have their chapels contained in their stone mastabas, or superstructures, but the mortuary chapels of the pyramids where regal pharaohs lay were separate temples, each to the east of the corresponding pyramid, and connected by a causeway to the massive gate chapel, or propylaeon, at the edge of the rock plateau. The gate chapel leading to the second pyramid, nearly buried in the drifting sands, yawns subterraneously southeast of the Sphinx. Persistent tradition dubs it the Temple of the Sphinx, and it may perhaps be rightly called such if the Sphinx indeed represents the second pyramid's builder, Khephren. There are unpleasant tales of the Sphinx before Khephren, but whatever its elder features were, the monarch replaced them with his ode, that men might look at the colossus without fear. It was in the great gateway temple that the life-size Dorite statue of Khephren, now in the Cairo Museum, was found. A statue before which I stood in awe when I beheld it. Whether the whole edifice is now excavated, I am not certain, but in 1910 most was below ground, with the entrance heavily barred at night. Germans were in charge of the work, and the war or other things may have stopped them. I would give much, in view of my experience, and of certain Boudoin whisperings, discredited or unknown in Cairo, to know what has developed in connection with certain well in a traverse gallery, where statues of the pharaoh were found in curious juxtaposition to the statues of baboons. The road as we traversed it on our camels that morning curved sharply past the wooden police quarters, post office, drugstore, and shops on the left, then plunged south and east in a complete bend that scaled the rock plateau and brought us face to face with the desert under the lee of the Great Pyramid. Past Cyclopean masonry we rode, rounding the eastern face and looking down ahead into the valley of the minor pyramids, beyond which the eternal Nile glistened to the east, and the eternal desert shimmered to the west. Very close, the three major pyramids loomed, the greatest devoid of outer casing and shrewd in its bulk of great stones, but the others retaining here and there neatly fitted covering which had made them smooth and finished in their day. Presently we descended towards the Sphinx and sat silent beneath the spell of those terrible unseeing eyes. On the vast stone breast we faintly discerned the emblem of Ra-Hatake, for whose image the Sphinx was mistaken in the late dynasty, and though sand covered the tablet between the great paws, we recalled what Thutmosis IV inscribed thereon, and the dream he had when he was a prince. It was then that the smile of the Sphinx vaguely displeased us, and made us wonder about the legends of subterranean passages beneath the monstrous creature, leading down to the depths. None might dare hint at depths connected with mysteries older than the dynastic Egypt we excavate, and having a sinister relation to the persistence of abnormal animal-headed gods in the ancient Neolithic pantheon. Then, too, it was, I asked myself, an idle question, whose hideous significance was not to appear for many an hour. Other tourists now began to overtake us as we moved to the sound-choked temple of the Sphinx, 50 yards to the southeast, which I have previously mentioned as the great gate of the causeway to the pyramid's mortuary chapel on the plateau. Most of it was still underground, and although we dismounted and descended through a modern passageway to its alabaster corridor and the pillared hall, I felt that Abdul and the local German attendant had not shewn us all there was to see. After all, we made this conventional circuit of the pyramid plateau, examining the second pyramid and the peculiar ruins of its mortuary chapel to the east, the third pyramid and its miniature southern satellites, and the ruined eastern chapel, the rock tombs and the honeycombings of the fourth and fifth dynasty, and the famous Campbell's tomb, whose shadowy shaft sinks precipitously for 53 feet to a sinister sarcophagus, which one of our camel drivers divested of cumbering sand after a vertiginous descent by rope. Cries now assailed us from the Great Pyramid, where Boudoirs were besieging a party of tourists with offers to guidance to the top, or of displays of speed and the performance of solitary trips up and down. 7 minutes is said to be the record for such an ascent and descent, but many lusty sheiks and sons of sheiks assured us they could cut it to 5 if given the requisite impetus of liberal baksheesh. They did not get this impetus, though we did let Abdul take us up, thus obtaining a view of unprecedented magnificence, which included not only remote and glittering Cairo with its crowned citadel and background of gold-violet hills, but all the pyramids of the Memphian district as well, from Abdul Rossa on the north to Dashur on the south. The Saqqara step pyramid, which marks the evolution of the low mastaba to the true pyramid, shewed clearly and alluringly in the sandy distance. It is close to the transition monument that framed Tomb Pereneb was found, more than 400 miles north of the Theban rock valley where Tutankhamun sleeps. Again, I was forced to silence through sheer awe. The prospect of such antiquity and the secrets of each hoary monument seemed to hold and brood over filled me with a reverence and sense of immensity nothing else ever gave me. Fatigued by our climb and disgusted with the importunate Bedouins whose actions seemed to defy every rule of taste, we omitted the arduous detail of entering the cramped interior passages of any of the pyramids, though we saw several of the hardiest tourists preparing for the suffocating crawl through Cheopos's mightiest memorial. We dismissed our overpaid local bodyguard and drove back to Cairo with Abdul Reis under the afternoon sun. We half regretted the omission we had made. Such fascinating things were whispered about the lower pyramid passages not in the guidebooks, passages whose entrance had been hastily blocked up and concealed by certain uncommunicative archaeologists who had found and begun to explore them. Of course, this whispering was largely baseless on the face of it, but was curious to reflect how persistently visitors were forbidden to enter the pyramids at night, or to visit the lowest burrows and crypts of the Great Pyramid. Perhaps the latter case, it was the psychological effect which was feared, the effect on the visitor of himself feeling huddled down beneath a gigantic world of solid masonry, joined to the life he had known as the merest tube, in which he may only crawl, and which at any accident or evil design might block. The whole subject seemed so weird and alluring that we resolved to pay the Pyramid Plateau another visit at the earliest opportunity. For me, this opportunity came much earlier than I expected. That evening, members of our party, feeling somewhat tired after the strenuous program of the day, I went alone with Abdul Reis for a walk through the picturesque Arab quarter. Though I had seen it by day, I wished to study the alleys and bazaars at dusk, when the rich shadows and mellow gleams of light would add to their glamour and fantastic illusion. The native crowds were thinning, but they were still very noisy and numerous when we came upon a knot of revelling Bedouins in the Sukan Nasan, or bazaar, of the coppersmiths. Their apparent leader, an insolent youth with heavy features and saucily cocked tarbrush, took some notice of us and evidently recognized with no great friendliness my competent but admittedly surreptitious and still sneering disposed guide. Perhaps, I thought, he resented that odd reproduction of the Sphinx's half-smile, which I had thought often remarked with amused irritation. Or perhaps he did not like the hollow and spherical resonance of Abdul's voice. At any rate, the exchange of ancestral language became very brisk before long. Aleksic, as I heard the stranger called when called by no worse name, began to pull violently at Abdul's robes, an action quickly reciprocated and leading to a spirited scuffle in which both combatants lost their sacredly cherished headgear, and would have reached an even dire condition had I not intervened and separated them by main force. My interference, at first seemingly unwelcome on both sides, succeeded at last in effecting a truce. Sullenly each belligerent composed with his wrath and his attire, and with an assumption of dignity as profound as it was sudden, the two formed a curious pact of honour, which I soon learned is a custom of great antiquity in Cairo, a pact for the settlement of their difference by means of a nocturnal fist-fight atop the Great Pyramid. After long the departure of the last moonlight sightseer, each duellist was to assemble in a party of seconds, and the affair was to begin at midnight, proceeding by rounds in the most civilized possible fashion. In all this planning there was much of which excited my interest. The fight itself promised to be unique and spectacular, while the thought of the scene put on that hoary pile overlooking the antediluvian plateau of Giza, under the wan moon of the pallid small hours, appealed to every fibre of imagination in me. A request found Abdul exceedingly willing to admit me to his party of seconds, so that all the rest of the early evening I accompanied him to various dens in the most lawless regions of the town, mostly northeast of Uzbekia, where he gathered one by one a select and formidable band of congreal cutthroats as his pugilistic background. Shortly after, 9 of our party mounted on donkeys bearing such royal or tourist reminiscent names as Ramsay or Mark Twain or J.P. Morgan or Manana, edged through the streets and labyrinths, both oriental and occidental, across the muddy and mast-forested Nile by the bridge of the bronze lions, and cantered philosophically between the labakas on the roads to Giza. Slightly over 2 hours we were consumed by the trip, towards the end of which we passed the last of the returning tourists, saluted the last inbound trolley car, and were alone with the night and the past and the spectral moon. Then we saw the vast pyramids at the end of the avenue, ghoulish with the dim menace which I had not seemed to notice in the daytime. Even the smallest of them held a hint of ghastly, for it was not that they had buried Queen Nicaris alive in the 6th dynasty, subtle Queen Nicaris, who once invited all her enemies to a feast in a temple below the Nile and drowned them by opening the water gates. I recall that the Arabs whisper things about Nicaris and shun the 3rd pyramid at certain phases of the moon. It must have been over her that Thomas More was brooding when he wrote the thing muttered about in the Memphian boatmen, the subterranean nymph that dwells mid sunless gems and glories hid, the lady of the pyramid. Early as we were, Aleksic and his party were ahead of us, for we saw their donkeys outlined against the desert plateau at Kafra el-Haram, towards which the squalid Arab settlement, close to the Sphinx, we had diverged instead of following the regular road to the manor house, where some of the sleepy, inefficient police might have observed and halted us. Here, where filthy Bedouins stabled camels and donkeys in the rock tombs of Khephren courtiers, we were led up the rocks and over the sand to the great pyramid, up whose time-worn signs the Arabs swarmed eagerly. Abdul Rais offered me the assistance I did not need. Most travelers know the apex of this structure has long been worn away, leaving a reasonably flat platform 12 yards square. On this eerie pinnacle a squared circle was formed, and in a few moments the sardonic desert moon leered down upon the battle which, but for the quality of the ringside cries, might as well have occurred at some minor athletic club in America. As I watched it, I felt that some of our less desirable institutions were not lacking, for every blow, feint, and defence bespoke stalling, to my not inexperienced eye. It was quickly over, and despite my misgivings as to methods, I felt a sort of preparatory pride when Abdul Rais was adjudged the winner. Reconciliation was phenomenally rapid, and amidst the singing, fraternizing, and drinking which followed, I found it difficult to realize that a quarrel had ever occurred. Oddly enough, I myself seemed to be more of a center of notice than the agonists, and from my smattering of Arabic, I judged that they were discussing my professional performances and escapes from every sort of manacle and confinement, in a manner which indicated not only a surprising knowledge of me, but a distinct hostility and skepticism concerning my feats of escape. It gradually dawned on me that the elder magic of Egypt did not depart without leaving traces, and that fragments of strange secret lore and priestly cult practices have survived surreptitiously amongst the Philian to an extent that the prowess of this strange holy or magician is resented and disputed. I thought of how much my hollow-voiced guide, Abdul Rais, looked like an old Egyptian priest or pharaoh or smiling sphinx, and wondered. Suddenly, something happened which in a flash proved the correctness of my reflections and made me curse the denseness whereby I had accepted this night's events, as other than the empty and malicious frame-up that they now shewed themselves to be. Without warning, and doubtless in answer to some subtle sign from Abdul, the entire band of Bendoirs precipitated itself upon me, and having produced heavy ropes, soon had me bound securely, as I was never bound in the course of my life, either on stage or off. I struggled at first, but soon saw that one man could make no headway against a band of over 20 sinewy barbarians. My hands were tied behind my back, my knees bent to their fullest extent, and my wrists and ankles stoutly linked together with unyielding cords. A stifling gag was forced into my mouth, and a blindfold fastened tightly over my arms. Then, as the Arabs bore me aloft on their shoulders, they began a jouncing descent of the pyramid. I heard the taunts of my late guide Abdul, who mocked and jeered delightfully in his hollow voice, and assured me that I would soon too have my magical powers put to a supreme test, which would greatly remove any egotism I might have gained through triumphing over all these tests offered by America and Europe. Egypt, he reminded me, is very old, and has full of inner mysteries and antique powers not even conceivable by the experts of today, whose devices had so uniformly failed to entrap me. How far or in what direction I was carried I cannot tell, for the circumstances were all against the formation of any accurate judgment. I know, however, that it could not have been a great distance, since my bearers at no point hastened beyond a walk, yet kept me aloft surprisingly short time. It is this perplexing brevity which makes me feel like almost shuddering whenever I think of Giza and its plateau, as for one is oppressed by hints of the closeness to everyday tourist routes of what had existed and must still exist. The evil abnormality I speak of did not become manifest at first. Setting me down on a surface which I recognized as sand rather than rock, my captors passed a rope around my chest and dragged me a few feet to the ragged opening in the ground, into which they presently lowered me with much rough handling. For apparent aeons I bumped against the stony, irregular sides of a narrow, hewn well, which I took to be one of the numerous burial shafts of the plateau, until the prodigious, almost incredible depth of it robbed me of all basis of conjecture. The horror of the experience deepened with every dragging second. That any descent through the sheer solid rock could be so vast without reaching the core of the planet itself, or that any rope made by man could be so long as to dangle me into these unholy and seemingly fathomless profundities of nether earth, were beliefs of such grotesqueness that it were easier to doubt my agitated senses than to accept them. Even now I am uncertain, for I know how deceitful the sense of time becomes when one or more of the usual perceptions or conditions of life is removed or distorted. But I am quite sure that I have preserved a logical consciousness that far. That at least I did not add any fully grown phantoms of imagination to a picture hideous enough in its reality, and explicable by type of cerebral illusion vastly short of any actual hallucination. All this was not the cause of my first bit of fainting. The shocking ordeal was cumulative, and the beginnings of later terrors were a perceptible increase in my rate of descent. They were paying out that infinitely long rope very swiftly now, and I scraped cruelly against the rough and constricted sides of the shaft as I shot madly downwards. My clothing was in tatters, and I felt the trickle of blood all over. Even above the mounting and excruciating pain, my nostrils, too, were assailed by a scarcely definable menace, creeping odour of damp and staleness, curiously unlike anything I had ever smelt before, and having faint overtones of spice and incense that lent an element of mockery. Then the mental cataclysm came. It was horrible, hideous beyond all articulate description, because it was all of the soul, with nothing of detail to describe. It was the ecstasy of nightmare and a summation of the fiendish. The suddenness of it was apocalyptic and demonic. One moment I was plunging agonizingly downwards in that narrow well of a million-toothed torture, yet the next moment I was soaring on bat wings in the gulfs of hell, swinging free and swooping through illimitable miles of boundless musty space, rising dizzily to measureless pinnacles of chilling aether, then diving gaspingly to sucking nadas of ravenous, nauseous lower Vachna. Thank God for the mercy that shut out in oblivion those clawing furies of consciousness which half hinged my faculties and tore harpy-like at my spirit. That one respite, short as it was, gave me the strength and sanity to endure those greater sublimations of cosmic panic that lurked and gibbered on the side road ahead. That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week, and we will continue Under the Pyramids by H.P. Lovecraft. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you. Whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden, please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse has many intriguing portals for you to explore this week. To the north, just your average day as a devil hunter. With your half-demon blood, you can travel between worlds, see things mortals can't. And today you've got a date with the king of the underworld. Good luck. To the west, all the bestest boys live here. We must organize them so very neatly, so that they can be at home in their places. Enjoy organizing them so very neatly. To the east, framed for murder of the beloved Empress, you must find the truth. Hide in the shadows to take down a corrupt government. Peace by bloody peace. And if you're making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.